Welcome to Changing Higher Ed, a podcast dedicated to helping higher education leaders improve their institutions. With your host, Dr. Drumm McNaughton, CEO of The Change Leader, a consultancy that helps higher ed leaders holistically transform their institutions. Learn more at changinghighered.com. And now, here's your host, Drumm McNaughton.
Thank you, David. Our guests today are Dick Light of the Harvard School of Education and Allison Jegla, co-authors of the new book, Becoming Great Universities, Small Steps for Sustained Excellence. Dick is the Carl H. Forsheimer Professor of Teaching and Learning at Harvard University. He's been asked by 5 Harvard presidents over the past 25 years to explore ways to improve the undergraduate experience, both at Harvard and also for a diverse group of quite different colleges. To accomplish this, he's created the Harvard Assessment Seminars, a consortium of leaders from 25 colleges and universities, with the common goal to carry out research on enhancing college effectiveness. He's also authored 4 books, including one which has become one of the 3 best-selling books in the 100-year history of Harvard University Press. Allison is a nonprofit leader and higher education strategist. She hails from Portland, Michigan, and is a first-generation student who attended the University of Pennsylvania as an undergraduate and Harvard School of Education for her master's degree. While at Harvard, she participated in Harvard's Higher Education Forum, consulted for the National Center for Rural Education Research Networks, and was a recipient of the Phyllis Strimling Award in recognition of her work in advancing women in society. Allison, Dick, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Drumm.
We're delighted to be here.
Well, good. I mean, you guys, you just had this new book come out entitled Becoming Great Universities. I've read bits of it. I'm fascinated. I am just fascinated by some of the things that you did. And before we get into the book, how did you guys get together to do this project? I mean, you know, there's a significant age difference between, Dick, you have been around the block so many times. Allison, you just graduated from school. How did you get together on this?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Drumm. So at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, every new grad student gets paired with a faculty advisor. So Dick and I were fortuitously, at least on my part, matched up, myself as the new graduate student, as you just mentioned, and he as the senior professor. So we met for our initial conversation, got talking about our shared alma mater, the University of Pennsylvania, and a shared optimism about higher ed. And it really kind of kicked off this throughout the course of the year, we would just have these conversations and really would get into these deep thoughts about higher education and our optimism and excitement about it. And one day, Dick and I, over a conversation, he mentioned that he was writing a book and asked if I would be interested in potentially being a co-author on it. It was a tremendous opportunity that I'm still so incredibly grateful for. Of course, we intended to do this in person, sitting across the table from one another, but the world had other plans. So, I retreated to my childhood home in Michigan. Dick sat at his home in Cambridge last year, and we wrote the book together, albeit asynchronously at times.
That's a fabulous story. Now, you said something that's interesting to me, that you guys met up with you as a recent graduate. Dick, is there a mentoring program that happens after students graduate from Harvard where you're paired up, or did I misunderstand that?
When you say mentoring, the answer is there's no official mentoring program. Just to repeat one highlight of what Allison said, it was sheer happenstance that one of my faculty colleagues, Judy McLaughlin, who was the chair of the higher education program for Harvard graduate students, basically said, I think, Allison and Dick Light, they'd be a good match in terms of advisor-advisee. There was no official mentoring, but once I sat across the table from Allison, every time I had an idea, Allison said, that's good, but what about the other thing? And she kept improving my ideas. Then I gave her a few pages I drafted, and she edited it, and it came out way better. And that's what led me to say, hey, want to be a co-author? So I'm sort of repeating what she said, but the point just is it's informal. And, the truth is, do I spend the amount of time and effort with most students that I did with Allison? No. On the other hand, she has so much to offer. And we did have the shared alma mater of Penn, which immediately gave us something to talk about, although, no joking, close to 50 years apart.
Well, my condolences on both of you having gone to Penn. So,
ooh, this might have to be the end of the episode. I don't know about that comment.
So anyway, this book, you guys got together, and thank you for that story. That's neat. We don't often hear that on the podcast of how people come together. And kudos to you, Allison, for doing the work and helping Dick, and really having the fortitude, because Dick is one of those pillars of light in the higher education milieu. And for someone just graduated to be able to say to Dick, well, I don't agree with that, that says a lot about the education about you as a person.
Well, thanks. Luckily, we do agree on quite a bit. I think it was more so a yes and conversation as we continued to think and then write the book. But It's really funny, thinking about the 50 years that did separate our experience at Penn. We had, some things that were very similar, of course, some things that were different, but it was such a great starting point for our conversations, and then just kind of developed from there. So, but yeah, I'm very fortunate to have had the chance to work with him for nearly 2 years, I guess, when all was said and done.
Yeah. And all through COVID. So, fabulous on that. Let's get into the meat of it. I can talk about this. This is fascinating to me, but let's talk about this. Why this book and why now?
I'll tell you, actually, I can be quite specific. I won't speak for Allison here, I'll speak for myself. There have been a whole group of higher education books that have been published in the last few years. I think some of them are darn good. I can actually start giving examples. Stephen Brint, 2 Cheers for Higher Education, Roosevelt Montes, Socrates in the Modern Classroom, published by Princeton Press. Anyway, I could give a list. There are a few that are what I would call optimistic, but there are many that are down on it. Some say universities should all be run like businesses. By the way, I'm very pro-business, as Allison knows. Nonetheless, having said that, for me to hear people from many of my friends from the business world say, why doesn't a university or a college run more like a business? It suggests they don't quite understand, much of what goes on. That's a whole other conversation. Anyway, the big point is that I tend to be very optimistic about the future of higher education. Maybe that's one of the things that bonded a little bit, if I can use that word, Allison and me. And that's, I think it's fair to say Allison also is sort of optimistic. There are a million imperfections, but the point just is we wanted to write a book now because there's so much negative being said. It's not a political point. It's not Democrat, Republican. That's not the point. The point just is there's so much opportunity. And I'm going to say the second reason very quickly is often, because I visit many other campuses, often the reaction I get when I do a presentation of any kind is, oh, well, Harvard is rich. You're at Harvard, so you can do all those things. We're not rich. You don't get it, Dick. We're not Harvard. To which I say, no, that's actually not the point. We wrote this book to answer your question, Drumm. We must have 100, literally 100 specific suggestions of zero cost or darn near zero cost innovations, new ideas, ways of teaching, ways of gathering information that any campus that's counting pennies can put into place. I'm assuming we'll touch on a few of those soon.
Oh, absolutely. And, what I like about it is, yeah, they're free. Most of the suggestions are free. They're low cost. But they're things that institutions are already doing. You studied over 200 campuses as you were putting together the material for this. The suggestions can work at all different kinds of colleges. It isn't just a Harvard, or it just isn't a Penn State or something like that. They're easy to implement. To me, that's fascinating because, you're actually out there, and I'm going to steal my own tagline, you're out there actually trying to change higher ed.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
And yeah, it's really that almost back to basics approach that we're really trying to get at, where you don't have to have, a PhD in higher education and have studied this forever. You can be really even a student, an incoming student. In many cases, we use as our suggestions, who are coming in and they're making a change on their campus. They're changing the framework or the culture of a campus little by little. I think a lot of people get in their own heads about, am I qualified to do this? Do I have the best idea to do this? But really, one of our messages is just try, go out there and try something. If it doesn't work, okay, try something else next time.
Which really takes us into the first of the 4 areas of the book, is creating a culture of innovation and experimentation. Dick, this is one of your areas of expertise, please.
I'll be very happy to do that. And what I'd like to do is give a couple of short examples. I'm going to use one from our book, and that is, there's a professor. This is a terrific woman. She's, a middle-aged woman. She's been at Swarthmore on their faculty, Swarthmore College, for probably 15 years. I met her and I asked, what do you teach? And she explained she teaches statistics. Well, my PhD is in statistics. Immediately we had something in common. And I said, this is great. How do you teach it? She said, well, I certainly don't ask the students to read chapters 2 and 3 for next week, and then we discuss cards in a deck or whatever it is. I said, what do you do? And she said, well, I go to a local food bank or I go to a local blood bank, and I ask, can my students learn statistics by helping you solve a real world problem? Keywords, real world problem. And Professor Lynn Schofield from Swarthmore simply found eager clients. I like the word client. This is a real world organization that needs help. And Lynn Schofield from Swarthmore is offering free help, the work of her undergraduates, who meanwhile are learning statistics because they're learning how to analyze data for the blood bank or the food bank or any other worthy purpose. I'll stop there. My big point is simply, that's an example to me of a campus that encourages, and a particular faculty member who understands the value of innovating. I don't think most campuses do that. We have begun here at Harvard. I don't want to make this a Harvard commercial, truly. I'll simply say we must have easily 50 classes. Now that's only, 2% of all our classes. But those 50 classes really do tackle real world problems for real world clients. I teach one of them, and many colleagues teach others. And the leadership of our campus encourages that because it's sort of a new way. The students get so engaged.
It reminds me of one of our former guests, Dr. Philly Mantella, who's the president of the Grand Valley State University up in Michigan. Her campus, and 5 other campuses have put together an initiative they call REP4, Rapid Education Prototyping for Change, Learners, Community, and Equity. And it is about experimentation. Now, most institutions, they'll do a, quote, pilot program. They'll try something. If they do that at all, usually they don't want to innovate. How do you suggest institutions get this innovation gene or cultivate that innovation gene more than they need to, the experimentation? Please, Allison.
Sure. So I think a big point here, because we've heard that too, right? Like, this is a big idea. You're changing a campus culture. You're creating this new kind of energy around innovation. And our suggestion for that is, start with a coalition of the willing. Start with a group of faculty members, group of professors who are willing to try something new, and then watch that blossom and expand as they're successful. I think the Lynn Schofield example is a great one because it's one professor who's teaching, let's say 30 students, but then those 30 students maybe are talking about it in their classes. Dr. Schofield's talking about it to her faculty friends and in meetings in her department, and suddenly that one idea can be spread throughout an entire campus. It really isn't about getting every single faculty member on board to commit to something, perhaps. It could really be as simple as one individual here or there that ultimately begins to change the campus culture.
And with those changes, you've got your student end of course evaluations, and those faculty members who are, not expecting memorization out of the book. I mean, Bloom's taxonomy, levels 1 and 2, but they're really applying it at real world problems. It's like, okay, now I understand the importance of statistics and how it can be used. I mean, it was 40 years after I took calculus classes that I really understood what calculus was for.
Exactly.
So this is a great example.
I love what you just said, Drumm. Let me, if I may, put a little postscript on it, and that's simply one of the biggest insights I had as I was involved with some of these, real world examples where some campuses tried some innovations. A basic principle that the leadership of a campus should make clear is no one expects all innovations or all new ideas to succeed. And my favorite example comes from a real world university. I won't even mention its name. I'll just say it's a well-known, it's not my campus at all. It's a real world, very good university. And the chair of the biology department wanted to try new ways of teaching introductory biology to continue to stoke up the students' interest. So she got 5 professors, all different ages, genders, all that, to try new ways of teaching biology. I just want to say she must have stressed 10 times, I don't expect all 5 new ways to work. If we find 1 or 2 out of the 5 increase student learning or increase the level of interest so that students go on and take more advanced courses in biology, that's a total success. So I just want to say it's a mindset that let's try new things with the full understanding, like starting a new business. Some will succeed, some will not succeed, but let's reward everyone who gives it a try.
It reminds me of a quote when I do presentations on leadership. Jim Reed from the Reed Corporation, and this is right out of the Leadership Challenge. He says, when my employees make mistakes trying to improve something, I give them a round of applause.
Exactly.
Right.
You've got to encourage these type of things. Do either of you know how everybody knows WD-40, right?
Yeah, I mean the spray, that like an oil. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Do you know how it got its name?
No.
It was the 40th try at making what it was they wanted to do. Hence 40.
I did. You taught me a new thing. I didn't know that.
So innovation is a mindset that you have to be able, it's like any kind of muscle. You have to be able to build that muscle, and the only way you do it is by trying it. And if you fail, the best institutions learn how to fail fast.
Yep.
And just continue to move on. So innovation is so critical, and it doesn't cost a lot of money to do it. You can build that small coalition like what you were talking about. The other thing that I am seeing, and moving on to another section of your book talking about student learning outcomes, I am seeing, and there's reports out from AAC&U about how there is a disconnect in student learning outcomes versus what employers want from graduates. Dick, this is one of your areas of expertise. What did you find when you were doing your research, and what did it show up like in the book?
I can tell you exactly, and I can give you a couple of very short, concrete examples. When I visited a variety of campuses, from the most famous to the least famous, many of them, one of my roles is as a friendly consultant with no axe to grind. Someone invites me to come, a dean, a president, whoever it may be. And basically I ask friendly questions. One of the questions I posed that almost no one could answer, I used to ask one sentence: do you know what your students really know? And people, including many university presidents, just stared at me. What do you mean? I said, I mean exactly what I said. Do you know what your students know? To which anyway, here's the point. One, let me give you my example of good, a campus that did something good. One campus said, we really don't know what our graduating seniors, what do they know? What don't they know? What can they do? What can't they do? So they invited a few people. I was just one of a group they invited. Come for one day. come, we'll give you a tiny honorarium. It's, a small honorarium. But the point just is, come for a day. We want you to sit one-on-one with a group of our graduating seniors, one at a time, 10 minutes each, meet with 20 such seniors and ask them a few questions that our faculty hope our students know the answer to. So I go to the campus and I'm given a list of questions to ask by the university's faculty. So notice who's in charge. It's the university's faculty. It's not Richard Light, not Dick Light visiting from Harvard. So I'm sitting with a sweet young woman, graduating senior. My first question given to me by the faculty was, who is Sigmund Freud? The faculty seemed to care that students should know who the heck is Sigmund Freud. And I just said, I don't need a big lecture, just, in 3 sentences, can you convey that you have some idea who Sigmund Freud is? And the woman was so good, she just looked at me and she just said, well, gee, I'm not an expert, but I know, German, Austrian, psychiatrist, Oedipus complex, she said, and I said, that's great. You obviously have a rough idea who he is. She said, oh, this is good. Keep it up. What's your next question? Then I said, second question. Tell me, just talk for 30 seconds. Say anything sensible you like about the Human Genome Project. And she stared at me and she said, oh, I was an English major. And I said, well, that's very nice. But what about the Human Genome Project? And she said, the truth is, I don't know. I'm aware I should know, but I don't. Anyway, the end of the story, to get right to the end, this university learned that 94% of their graduating seniors had some idea who Sigmund Freud is. They were doing very well, and they cared about that. They also cared about Human Genome Project. 48% of their graduating seniors could say one sentence about it. And, a number of us sort of think that's the whole future. But anyway, the point of my telling you this little story is, how much did it cost that campus to line up a few outside friends, like me and a few others, to spend one day, meet with a few students? For the first time in 20 years, their faculty got very specific feedback about what their students do know and don't know. And then they had multiple faculty meetings to discuss changes in their curriculum. But it was based on real data instead of everybody's hunches and anecdotes. I hope that's helpful.
Mm-hmm. It is. And Allison, you're closer to having graduated. When you were going through, did you understand what the student learning outcomes were supposed to be and how the learning related to them?
No. No, not really. I think when you're a college student, that's not really top of mind, right? You know how you get evaluated in a testing situation. You know what it takes to pass the class and what you need to do to, get that letter grade on your transcript. But I think there are certain questions that I wish I could go back and ask as I was doing, we called it shopping week at Penn, where you kind of get to go to different classes, sit in on them, kind of decide as you're making your schedule and deciding what classes you want to take, just simple things like, how do you evaluate student learning? Or how do you take what students are telling you? How do you incorporate student feedback into your classes? I think it's so important, and students don't really think to ask those things. We had a professor in graduate school who did that every single class period. He would ask students, what did you get out of today's class? What didn't you like about today's class? What can I do better next time? He had a whole list of questions. It took, 3 to 5 minutes tops, but he scheduled it into the class period. So we actually have time. It wasn't like you had to, run over the class period to finish it. Scheduled it into the class period. We wrote down our responses, and he actually sent out the aggregated class feedback. Obviously it was anonymous. We'd actually get to see what everyone else was thinking and use that. So if there was a concept where no one understood it, he knew then to incorporate that into the next class period and really go back and touch on that again. So I think in terms of the learning outcomes, even from class to class, it's something that a student doesn't necessarily think about, but it's even at that granular level, it can be incorporated into a professor's teaching strategy. And then at the university level too, we can think about evaluating students, not even evaluating, but kind of surveying them. What do they know when they come in as a first year? And then what do they know when they leave as a fourth year? Hopefully there's been some, demonstrable gain in learning in that time period, or at least, how they go about things like working in groups or, speaking out loud to people or doing a presentation to an outside group, something like that. There are so many ways that we can help students understand, what did I actually gain from having attended this university? And I think that's one of the things schools will have to maybe do looking forward, as we think about enrollment challenges and the like.
Which is a perfect segue for our next segment, is talking about changes in enrollment patterns. I mean, Allison, this is something near and dear to your heart. We're seeing the enrollment cliff coming up. We're seeing changing enrollment demographics, far more first-generation minority, much more diversity. Tell us about what you saw, and then how institutions can innovate to improve their enrollment.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a big thing that we saw, in the news, just in conversations with friends and family throughout COVID, and now as we're kind of getting into the post-COVID world, is just that real, like Dick referenced earlier, kind of there's a pessimism and a questioning around the value of higher ed that neither of us really subscribe to at all. But I think colleges will really have to start getting even more creative about the value proposition that they're actively putting out there to prospective students. Because it's not enough anymore to say that, here's your 4-year degree, here's your diploma, go have fun. It has to be much more robust than that, right? So we have to be able to say to students, here's what you will do better by having attended this university. Here's what you will actually gain, not only for these 4 years, but for the rest of your life. So Dick and I kind of reimagined the phrase lifelong learning, which for many kind of translates to, you graduate from a university, you might watch a webinar that a professor gives once a year. You might go on some sort of, Dick likes to say, an Alaskan cruise with your some members of your class, perhaps, and that's all deemed lifelong learning. But is it though? We kind of wanted to reframe that as lifelong engagement. So you're actually actively engaged with your institution, you're giving back to prospective students, maybe you're interviewing, you're engaged with that institution, and it's giving something back to you as well for the rest of your life. So no longer is it a 4-year, 3 to 5 year experience, it's a 50-year experience. It's something that you can come back to and that can be a part of your life for the rest of your life. And I think if I were a prospective student looking at colleges and I heard that would mean a lot to me. If I'm going to go spend, in some cases, $250,000 for an education, I want something that's going to be 50 or 60 years, not just 4. So that's really something we tried to think about hard for this book.
And I think the point you make is critical, and it's not just necessarily from students, graduates enrolling into programs further down the line, a la Arizona State, Michael Crow, lifelong learning, et cetera, et cetera. What you're talking about is an active involvement of alumni in the institution and being involved with recruiting. I mean, the Naval Academy, the West Point, the service academies have got probably the strongest alumni associations I have ever seen. I mean, I had a phone call last night from someone at the Alumni Association wanting to give my usual amount of money. But it's beyond the donations. It's the recruiting. I mean, the Naval Academy has their blue and gold officers, which are out there to help recruit people to come to the academy. That's, I think, what you're talking about, isn't it? That lifelong involvement and engagement with the institution.
Yeah, that's certainly a piece of it. Really isn't a downside to that. It's expanding the reach of the admissions teams. It's getting recent grads, in some cases, to share their experiences. They're able to go into areas geographically that a typical admissions team just simply wouldn't have the bandwidth or the resources to do. They can go sometimes to rural areas because they're from there, or they can go to states that aren't covered by a regional admissions team or what have you. So I think it is better for everyone when you have alumni involved, especially in the recruiting and admissions process, but also when you're thinking about things like, getting a job, or should I go for this graduate program versus that one? Or does this certification really make a difference? When, I'm moving to a new city, I need friends. Like, there's so many things where you can call upon your alumni, team of, however many hundreds of thousands in some cases that could be. And it's, at least my opinion, it's an underutilized resource for almost every school.
I know my two alma maters, the Naval Academy and then the Fielding Graduate University, they have chapters all over the country, and you can meet up with people there. You can build those relationships. I know Harvard does, Dick. They have the same thing. MIT does. I remember going to the MIT Forum in San Diego on a monthly basis, and they gave great presentations and learning about different things. So, I mean, this is a great idea, and it doesn't cost a lot. What it does is gets your graduates involved. And reverting back to that student learning outcomes, Dick, your expertise, you can actually leverage those alumni when they get out to go back and say, this is what I actually learned. This is what I wish I had learned. Is that true?
Exactly. And I love your example. And I can tell you a couple of true stories. And there, again, it's not about my university. It's about a young history student, about 20 years old, was probably a junior, a young man. He was a history major at Indiana University. As a history major, he said, the one missing piece of my education here at this great university, where I'm very happy and I'm a very satisfied student here, but I'd like to learn more about business. But that's not part of being a history major. So he found a young alum. I don't know the exact age. Why don't I make up 28 or 30 years old? Something like that, been out 8, 10 years. And the two of them were connected by the Alumni Association of Indiana University. And the 30-year-old, who's a successful young businessman, also was a history major 8 years ago at Indiana University. And he then mentored, to use your word, Drumm, he mentored the current undergraduate in principles of business. If I ever wanted to start a business, how might I think about it? Anyway, the end of the story is that the young man graduated, and a few years later, he then paid it forward. And at age 25 or 6, he offered to mentor an undergraduate, and it goes on and on. How much money changed hands in either direction? Zero. Now, that just requires an alumni association to make the connection. So yes, you need someone sitting in an office to do it. But my point is, no one pays anybody for the actual mentoring.
Yeah, that is a fabulous story. And you see that so often, but it's generally not a formal program and it's not publicized. So as an example of Indiana University, that is a fabulous, fabulous example. The last main area of the book is, and Allison, again, you have direct experience, is first generation and underrepresented students. And there are certain pieces, we're reading about this in the news, about institutions putting pieces in place to be able to support underrepresented students, especially during COVID. But I'd like to hear what your book had to say about that and some of the things that institutions can implement at a low or no cost.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the big things we talked about is in the book is just trying to avoid as much as possible putting those students in a bucket and just saying, okay, you're first gen. That means you're also all of these other things. You're low income and you don't have a clue what you're doing and you have no role models and this and that. Sure, that's true for a lot of students. And it's important to be aware of those factors that could be linked and in a lot of cases are linked. But there's also a great deal of value in, asking the students what they think and what they need. So that's, I think, something that isn't necessarily always done because it takes more time. It's easier just to make kind of these blanket assumptions about students, and it's not done with any sort of, ill will or lack of caring by any means. It's just, this has been what's described as these students' needs, and that's that. So in the book, we talk about advising conversations. So most schools have some sort of pre-major or major advising where a student will, like Dick and I, when I was in graduate school, student would meet with their faculty advisor or someone in the department of interest to them, and they'd talk about class schedules and, kind of making that transition from high school to college. So that's a great opportunity for the advisor to ask some of these questions for the student. Do you have any role models in your life who went to a four-year institution? Do you know how college exams are graded versus how your high school might have tackled it. Kind of going through some of those intricacies. And if that's something that might take a lot of time, and maybe that's what's lacking in a particular institution, make it a simple fill out the blanks worksheet, give it to the student in advance, and then go over their responses in an advising conversation. It doesn't have to be a 5-hour meeting. It could really be something that's already scheduled in. But that's really a big takeaway that we wanted to address in the book, is just saying that, each individual is unique, and the students know what they need, and they can be kind of prompted to help those who have more understanding of the particular college, kind of guide them to where they need to be.
I'm just laughing to myself. Ask people what they need. What a concept.
Right?
Right. No, exactly. Yeah. May I just build for a quick moment on what Allison said? I think she said it so well. I just want to actually make what for me is the sort of the big point in my mind, and that's the importance of good advising, especially for students from non-traditional backgrounds, underrepresented backgrounds, maybe low-income backgrounds, first-gen backgrounds. The importance of good advising. I want to give you a couple of examples. There are a number of campuses, very different kinds of campuses, public, private, large, small colleges and universities, where advisors who may be staff or they may be faculty, staff or faculty, they get together a couple times a year, not every week, a couple times a year, and they sort of discuss best practices. I want to give you my favorite example that I used personally. When I advised first-year students at my university, and I meet them for the first time, it's kind of like August 29th or September 1st. They just showed up on campus. They don't even know where the restrooms are yet, but they come into my office. I shake hands. I welcome them. The student sits down. And after making pleasantries for a minute, I'll just say, let me hit you with a few, I hope, straightforward questions. May I ask, what's your goal? You just arrived at college. What's your goal? I can tell you half of the students, roughly half, have a very thoughtful, good answer. They've thought about it. And then there's the other half. And it's completely clear they're taken aback and they've given the topic little thought. When that happens, I never criticize, I never smile at, laugh at them. Rather, I just, with a friendly smile, I say, you know what, this is a good topic. Why don't you think about this for next month when we meet again? And that'll be your friendly, informal homework assignment. You don't have to write anything. Just think about it. And let's talk about this next time we meet. My second example is even shorter. And my second example is, I'll say, what do you think your job is your first semester here at college? Michigan State, pick it out of a hat. And most students sort of stare at me and they say, oh, well, my job is to study hard and do well. To which I say, excellent, excellent, that's a good answer. But what's your real job? And they stare at me for a few moments. And then I say, if you don't remember anything we said to each other for the last 15 minutes, I hope you remember this final 15 seconds. Your job each semester here is to get to know, make an effort, screw up your courage, get to know one faculty member a little bit, and have that faculty member get to know you just a little bit. And just think, even if you fail at doing that half the time, by the time you graduate after 8 semesters, typically, you'll have 3 or 4 faculty who know you. They can serve as job references. They can serve as graduate school references if you ever want that, or any other purpose. But most of all, you'll feel you're part of the community. And again, I'm going to stop myself and just say, let's assume I'm pretending Michigan State. I picked it out of a hat. Now, how much would that cost Michigan State to have, Professor X talk to student Y and say, your job is to get to know a faculty member? It's literally zero. It's not sort of zero. It's exactly zero.
Well, it reminds me of the old saying that I learned years ago. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that's what you're talking about, is building those relationships that help both people, because the faculty members learn every time they should be learning every time they have an interaction with a student. Folks, I said this was going to happen at the beginning of the show. We're at 40 minutes already, and we could continue to talk for another hour, but we can't. So 3 takeaways for university presidents, for boards. What is it that they should remember the most from your book?
So I think a big thing that we talk about in several different chapters is trying new ways of teaching, kind of having that innovative spirit that we referenced earlier on in this episode, creating the coalition of the willing and getting the innovation to spread from there with the goal of really enhancing students' learning outcomes.
Yeah, so building that culture of innovation and pushing it down throughout the institution.
Yeah.
Every campus has an enormous number of students, some of whom are just exploding in the good sense with ideas. They've got great ideas. How can we improve first-year advising? How can we do something else that would be just terrific? How can we get the head of the elected presidents of the young Democrats and the young Republicans to co-sponsor some events so that they're really fun and exciting and engaging instead of having one group over here and the other group over there and never the twain shall meet. And so I'm just, these are simple examples, but the idea just is students are loaded with ideas. How much does it cost for any staff member or faculty member who's there every day anyway to make a few one-on-one appointments with a random sample, small sample, 20 students? Talk to one at a time for a half hour each. What are 3 things this campus could do to be even better? And students are loaded with ideas. Not all of them will be so good, but some will. And I think the campuses that try to use student insights benefit enormously.
Great, thank you. One more, Allison.
Yeah, I think there's something our incredible editor, Peter Doherty from Princeton Press, said the other day in an email that I really, really loved. He said, your book kind of encapsulates the idea that there's more to becoming a great university than dollars. So the best universities are really those that are enhancing the personal relationships. They're putting the students front and center. They're taking ideas. They're constantly trying to improve, even if they are a Harvard, for example. Harvard's Harvard because it's always doing things. It's always being innovative. It's always looking to the future. And any school can do that. It doesn't have to be a Harvard because a lot of these ideas really are low and no cost. So we're excited to have people go read the book and learn a lot more about our thoughts on what those suggestions are.
Those are great suggestions. Thank you. So, folks, what's next for you? Dick, you've got another book in the works, I think, do you not?
Yes, I actually do. And I'll say 2 sentences about it because that's about how far along I am. My working title is Not Your Mother's University. And put simply, it's that I'm taken aback sometimes. I know many of my faculty friends and so on. They actually work at universities. And, many of them are, say, in their 40s or their 50s, and they have kids in high school. So their kids are getting ready to apply to college, at age now 16, 18, whatever they are. I think most of the parents think that their children are going to attend a university and have a similar experience to what they have. They have no idea how different everything is. I can't resist giving you my favorite example. More and more colleges are now grading students based sharply and largely on their speaking contributions in class. No more sitting in silence in row 36, hiding behind a pole and taking notes but never contributing. The goal is to contribute because that's part of your grade. I want to say that's a small example. I've got a million others, but that's the next project.
Great. Thank you. Allison?
I do not have another book in the works. I'm on hiatus from book writing for a while, but I am in full promotion mode for our book. So very excited to continue conversations like this one and hopefully see some of these changes being made in institutions around the world.
Great. Well, thank you both. It's just been wonderful conversation with you, and I wish you all the best of luck going forward. I look forward to checking in with you in a year or so and just seeing how your lives have changed as a result of the book and all the changes in higher ed.
Drumm, this has been, I'll speak for myself, this has been a treat. It's been a pleasure. It's been a joy talking with you. And I hope the listeners find this, if everybody leaves with 1 or 2 new ideas, everyone wins. Win-win.
Exactly. Thanks, folks. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Absolutely. Thanks, Drumm. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening this week. And a special thank you to this week's special guests, Dr. Dick Light of Harvard University and Allison Jegla, for their sharing their wisdom from their recently released book, Becoming Great Universities: Small Steps for Sustained Excellence. Our next guest, we welcome back Tom Netting, president of 10 Government Strategies, who'll be joining us to give us an update on what's going on in Washington and at the Department of Education. As you may know, the department just wrapped up its latest round of negotiating rulemaking, and Tom has all the info on the possible changes and how they may affect your institution.
Changing Higher Ed is a production of The Change Leader, a consultancy committed to transforming higher ed institutions. Find more information about this topic, along with show notes on this episode at changinghighered.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to the show, and we would also value your honest rating and review. Email any questions, comments, or recommendations for topics or guests to podcast@changinghighered.com. Changing Higher Ed is produced and hosted by Dr. Drumm McNaughton, post-production by David L. White.